We are live.
Good morning, our viewers. My name is Dr. Adityanjee, and we are here on the CSA platform for the 8th episode of Strategically Speaking with Dr. Adityanjee. We have a distinguished guest today. Our guest today for this conversation is Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma. Lieutenant General Dr. Rakesh Sharma was commissioned in Gorkha Rifles in 1977. He served honorably in Indian Army for more than 40 years. He trained the army in Botswana for a period of 3 years. At this point in time, he is General Bipin Rawat Professor of Excellence at United Services Institution of India. He holds a PhD degree in Defense Studies. He has been a research fellow at MPIDSA, that is Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. He is also a distinguished fellow at Vivekanand International Foundation, as well as Center for Land Warfare Studies, or the CLAWS. Welcome, Lieutenant General Sharma, to Strategically Speaking with Dr. Adityanjee.
Thank you, Dr. Adityanjee, for inviting me. It's my honor to be here with you today.
I was very impressed with your recent article that appeared on VIF website, China sifting through paradoxes and whatever. And after reading that article, it didn't appear that it was written by an army man. It appeared that it was written by an economist. So tell us and our viewers, what is the central thesis of that paper that you wrote on VIF website?
Thank you, Dr. Adityanjee. And I think you um, underestimated the potential to think economy for the armed forces generals also. So, for our adversaries, we need to know everything that is supposed to be there. Now, when I read this paper, it's been spoken of for quite some time that the Chinese economy, its demography, its industrial status, and its everything is weakening, and they are having grave problems as times coming. There have been articles to say that they will not outlast 10 years, and some things have been mentioned like that. So that led me to study that what is the state here, and specifically because there is an adversarial relationship that India has with China, and especially so in the course of last 3 years, when the situation, especially on the eastern Ladakh borders, has been quite bad. So, what is the situation, and how should we deem it in our as an adversary? Now, having said that, there is some large amount of truth that specifically because of in the course of last decade or so, and more specifically in last 3 years, the Chinese economy has been waning. So I made five larger points. First point was about the economy itself. Indeed, the Chinese economy is waning. There is large unemployment. It goes up to 20% or so. There have been a pandemic. There has been large amount of debt that has been accumulated by the local governments. And local government here, it means it's like a province. It's a larger entity than what we call as a local government. And there have been real estate market problems, specifically because the real estate has 30% weightage into the GDP of the Chinese. So when you start accumulating all together, you know that there is a problem here. Despite all these problems, I came to the conclusion that Chinese economy is still rising at 5.5 to 5.5%. It's an $18 trillion economy. Even at this level, it will rise to by about $1 trillion in 1 year, which is larger than any one of these G7 economies in form. Now, rightly, it is not 10% growth that we saw in the era of Deng Xiaoping or Jiang Zemin or Hu Jintao, but it is lower. but then it is not that low to not make a substantial difference, because Chinese is the second largest economy. Yes, they have a problem here. People say that they have 100% infrastructure, habitat built extra than what is required. So there are problems here on many scores, but it is, the incessant tom-tomming people are saying Chinese economy is going for to doldrums and they are in a bad state and they are recession. Well, economic downturn is across there and globally. There is recession, there is inflation across in the world. The Chinese are also have similar things. So you can't say that the Chinese economy is that bad a state as it is being brought about. On technology front alone, there is ASPE report which says 37 out of 44 key technologies, Chinese are the leader. They are leader much ahead of the United States also. So there is a measure out here. The second issue is about the corruption and what's happening across within China. We have been hearing that in course the first tenure of President Xi Jinping, 100 odd journals were sacked. Then there were 100,000 who were put into jail because of corruption reasons. But suffice it to say that recently that these two gentlemen who have been missing, the foreign minister Chin Gang and also the defense minister Li Shangfu, who've been known across the world. They've traveled. They've come to India also often. They have been missing for various indiscretions or issues of procurement or issues of corruption or malpractices. There have also been issues regarding the rocket force, where two senior most generals were sacked and somebody else from Air Force was brought in to take the helm. If you add all these together, then you keep hearing about other functionaries saying that there is kind of a reputational loss of face for the Chinese if you have the foreign minister and the defense minister not available or missing for that reason. But having said that, it is a part of the Chinese system of functioning in which they do so. It is a news item saying that there is a defense ministers conference to be held in the course of October. They will have a new defense minister now in shortly, and it will be in chair. These two gentlemen were handpicked by President Xi, so his personal loss of face is there. That is an issue which needs to be concerned. But of course, there will be a change. Somebody else will come and start doing the same responsibility. Third issue is demographics. There have been major issues regarding overaging problem of Chinese, and specifically because there have been news saying that they have overcounted about 1 million people. Now, if they overcounted 1 million people, then that would have it means that India would have overtaken them as the largest demography well before the present time. But suffice it to say that indeed they have a problem of overaging. There are people don't want to get married. Don't get married. They don't want to have children. It's too expensive to have children. That erstwhile one child policy has had taken its toll, and it's affecting now. But there's still 1.3 million people. And having said that, they in the 14th five-year plan which came out last year, there have been efforts being made to sort out the demographic issues and push for a substantial change, like giving extra parental leave, child care facilities, hospitals for the elderly, the geriatric patients. So there has been an attempt made. The Chinese have probably understood that there is a problem here, so that problem is being addressed in their own manner. So presently there is trouble, but I think they are wanting to address the issue. So it's a important one here.
So
Fourth
you
issue, yes, sir.
very eloquently and cogently outline why we should not be underestimating China or its potential. And actually, that is an adage that you should never underestimate your enemy. You should be prepared for it and don't write an obituary. And as all of us understand, China is a serious strategic adversary for India.
Yeah.
In terms of military threats, what do you perceive as the main threat to India from China under current geopolitical scenario?
So, Dr. Adityanjee, I go a step backward, and to say that if you follow the historical writings in China from Sun Tzu or Zhuge Liang or the unrestricted warfare written by these two colonels. Chinese have always been educating to win without fighting. That's basic logic that they have followed over centuries. So that's a logic that they have followed here. So whatever expansionism largely they have done, maybe South China Sea or the pressure to Senkaku Islands or on Taiwan, even against India, the attempts have been to take over areas which they deem is to be theirs without any rationing, but they deem it is there without fighting a war. That's one part of the story. So that's the basic theme that they follow. Second is that they are in the game of causing a what has been largely called as a gray zone warfare, the place between peace and war, and that's the larger threat that the Chinese are posing to all of the world, especially also to India. And you can give many instances, like, for example, Hollywood. Now, no movie has been made in Hollywood since 1997, which is anti Chinese, because Chinese have inculcated influence in Hollywood. Similarly, influence has been created into Bollywood, where movies have been made where there is no anti Chinese feeling. Well, a small instance happens against Pakistan. There are movies generated in our own Hollywood, Bollywood, which are anti Pakistan, or but nothing comes out about China, despite the fact that there's a major incident which has happened on the borders in last 3 years. Similarly, influence on media houses, influence on even politicians or for think tanks. So Chinese in a big way in inculcating influence within the nation, and also causing disinformation, and through their allies like Pakistan, causing kind of cohesive problems within the country. So to say that before a military threat like the military issue comes up, we have to be mindful of the peacetime threats Chinese causes to us. Political threats, like for the example they do in United Nations, or against NSG regime, or renaming of the areas in Arunachal Pradesh. All this, if you cumulate together, there is a three warfare strategy: political, psychological, and legal. And Chinese in a big way to undermine the influence of India in this manner. I'd also like to add, if you say India has worked recently about G20 quite a bit, and to global south, and you got the African Union being part of it. Chinese recent papers which have come out on global south and which has been placed across an open realm, they are increasingly working to take the leadership role in global south. So they become a competitor in a larger manner. But having said that, we come to the basic question that you're raising: is there a threat on the for of war against from China? So any military man or anybody who is in the realms of geopolitics must not write off the threat that the Chinese pose to us in matters of warfare. It's the typology of warfare that the Chinese will fight is relevant. If you take your mind back, and I take my mind back into what we fought in 62, there was a Rezangla. If I take what happens in Galwan, again we fought without weapons, tooth and nail with the Chinese. So we are the capacities of the Indians or Indian armed forces to take on warfare on the land borders or on the seas is credible, very credible, and Chinese understand it. So the military threat that is posed on to India, well, it does not suffice alone on the borders. Chinese are in the game of putting India down geopolitically in the global manner. That's the larger aim that they would have. It's not a question of taking in small areas across on the land borders. That doesn't help. The Chinese, to do in doing so, have to ensure that they do not have a loss of face in the warfare. On the borders, there is always a possibility of Chinese having a loss of face. So they have now come down to this larger core principles or core theology of warfare, which says multi-domain precisional warfare. So they take all 6, 7 domains: the land, the sea, the air, the electromagnetic spectrum, the cyber warfare, and space. All 6 domains of warfare is also in their dimensions of physical, in dimension of informational and cognitive, affecting the minds of Indian people. That is the realm of warfare that the Chinese are planning, which they call it multi-domainal precision warfare, which is a way and steps ahead of thinking that there will be only a border war. It will be a multi-dimensional war which we will have to face in times to come.
So, talking about gray zone warfare and multi domain precision warfare, uh, if you look at the trade balance between India and China, in year 2022, India imported $101 billion worth of Chinese goods, more than our exports to China. Why are we subsidizing Chinese military machine, Chinese attack machinery of a strategic adversary by allowing this condition of adverse trade balance not in 1 billion, not in 2 billion, but $100 billion? Why?
So let's go back into the basics of economic trade as also adversarial relationship that you have in the Chinese, especially relationship to geopolitics and also on the territorial front. Now, you see the economics part of it, the Americans have got the maximum trade that you have with the Chinese, $700 billion or more. But the relationship between America and China is as adversarial as it can get. The ASEAN countries, the trade between ASEAN countries and China is about $1 trillion. That you see that Philippines have a problem, so does Vietnam has a problem, Malaysia has a problem, Indonesia has a problem, and all these countries in the latest map shown by the Chinese is their areas have been taken over by the Chinese. The fact is that economics work have moved into a different phase altogether. If I have to produce and my country has to produce and export items, it's always possible that the intermediary products are produced in China and brought in through the supply chains. No country can be an island by itself to say that we require now. For example, China's industry in solar panels or batteries is so advanced that for us to get on to the systemic of non-conventional sources of energy, we have to be dependent on the Chinese to buy these kind of equipment. Otherwise, we will not be able to do our goals on climate change. And the Chinese are the industrial head on all these manufacturing which is carried out in the global market. They are the manufacturing people of the world. And the supply chains are so intricate that while you may be buying an item from, say, Vietnam, it will be very difficult to say that the basic product is not produced in China, brought into Vietnam, converted into fixed produce, marked as made in Vietnam, and supplied to India. That's the way supply chains are moving. India has also naturally got into the same systemic, that there is a problem. We have $136 billion trade. It might go up to 150 billion in times to come. And the point that you're raising is absolutely right. Is this a threat? Now, economic trade has been a threat, as many countries have seen. South Korea saw it when they got the THAAD, the American supplied THAAD, which is the ballistic missile defense. The entire lot of malls that with the South Koreans had in China, I think that were called Lotte or something, were actually kind of blocked by the Chinese. Similarly, Australians. Australia was such large supplier of wines. In fact, somebody said the Chinese seems to be very thirsty because they take so much of wine from Australia. Just 40% of Australian trade was wine supplied to China. That was made zero in when the Australians raised the issue of investigating things. And similarly things have happened to Lithuania and to, so Chinese do use economic coercions when they want to use it. So your point has got two meanings. One is that the dependence on Chinese, even for Indians, is essential today for India's growth. Otherwise, we will not be able to compete in the world market. Even for, say, we are making Apple 15s now. The Apple 15, the basic product is maybe produced here, but the larger equipment actually of the parts of the of Apple 15 are coming from China and from elsewhere. So this is the intricacy of supply chains. When we start considering economics and warfare in today's world, we have to basket them together. And we have to also prepare, as you're alluding to accept that then there will be vulnerabilities created in this trade, economic trade that we have with Chinese. And there is always a possibility of Chinese threatening us tomorrow by coercion. So we have to prepare ourselves for that time. And that is how I think the direction that we are largely moving. But see, this transformation is bound to take some time.
I can understand import of, you know, supply chain ingredients or raw material or, advanced high-tech products like solar panels. But what about, low technology consumer goods or toys or, you know, Ganesha icons and things like that? Uh, you know, India has to get her act together and hurt where it hurts in the pocketbook in the era of geoeconomics. The analogy with United States is not a true analogy. China does not occupy any land of United States mainland. And in all the ASEAN countries, yes, it has adverse, uh, possession of some of the islands, Philippines, etc. But as far as the land mass is concerned, China does not occupy any land mass. So again, that analogy with ASEAN is slightly different. And one would expect that India, pursues right policies and hurts the Chinese behemoth where it hurts in today's era, which is considered not to be era of war. It is the era of economies, and we are keeping on subsidizing. So there is some food for thought there for future years to balance this trade adverse balance. But coming back to military threats, as you said that as a military man, you would not undercount any military threats whatsoever, especially since China is talking about multi-domain precision warfare. In terms of maritime domain, where do you perceive threat from an expanding plan to India in maritime domain, especially since they control the Gwadar port, the Hambantota port? Do you perceive any naval or maritime domain threat from China?
So I would like to segregate the land threat and the maritime threat into two separate issues here. In maritime threat, there is a problem that the Chinese face. They have a large navy, very large navy, expanding also greatly. Their navy is also in some form larger than by vessels alone, larger than the American navy. But they have to actually come into Indian Ocean and base themselves to undertake operations here. That requires them to have facilities for sustaining their fleet into the Indian Ocean, which is not simple. Now they have 14, 15 bases being ports being not bases. I'll say ports being constructed along the Indian Ocean region. From Africa to Djibouti, they have a base, or Gwadar, or like you said, Hambantota, port of Colombo. There is port made in Cox's Bazar. There are two ports in Myanmar. So they are building ports. Now to say that these ports can be utilized for purpose of sustaining the Chinese Navy, the plan for operations against India, if it happens tomorrow, which actually, by laws of the Navy, seas, implies that these countries will be deemed to be at war with us. If you allow a Chinese frigate to come and refuel itself, or frigates to come and refuel itself into one of these ports and then come into for combat against us, that becomes that nation becomes at war with us. There are rules which are important here. That's one issue. Second is, on its own, the Chinese Navy doesn't have the facility for some time to sustain fleets to come across in northern Indian Ocean or southern Bay of Bengal and undertake operations against us which is our backyard, where we have a very strong presence here. I'll also state here that the Chinese are got 60% or 65% dependent for mercantile trade, including energy, through the same sea lanes that cross across through the Andaman Sea or cross through the between the Andaman Sea and the Aceh or the Indonesian islands. So their loss will be tremendous because of any warfare taking place here. Their trade will have increasingly larger effect into this in case the areas are. So the Chinese have to think this way, that they have to plan it in a manner that in case there are hostilities in maritime front, how will they sustain without the energy resources that flow from Persian Gulf or from the Africa through the Malacca Straits. So there are significant issues of warfare here that needs to be understood. In the land, on the contrary, it is between two countries. It does not affect the world trade. What happens in Indian Ocean affects the ASEAN. It accepts the entire world, and then there are other navies operating here, like the American Navy, the Russian ships, or the French ships, or the UK. So there are multiple navies out here, and there is a threat, or there is a thought process that there is something called Quad around. And it must not be forgotten by the plan that there is a Quad and there is a presence of the United States Navy and the others in this entire area. And it's not a simple proposition to come and undertake operations. It's not Second World War. It's not even Incheon landings of Korea. This is 21st century, 2023. Any operations in maritime front will involve a, a larger effort between many navies across in this region, and that may be a worrying factor for the Chinese.
Coming to a different domain, you mentioned 6 or 7 domains. China has been increasing its space capabilities. It has indulged in a space militarization and weaponization program with advanced ASAT capabilities over the years since it's tested its first ASAT weapon, I think around 2010 or 2011. What challenges and threats to India you perceive in the space domain from China?
A very important question that you raised, Dr. Adityanjee. First is that the space has become now, um, ubiquitous in everything that you do in realms of warfare and elsewhere. Space becomes exceedingly important. All communications, all GPS, all measures of ISR are dependent on space, either the low orbit satellites or the higher ones, and all their drones, everything reflects across from the space. And now, if you follow Russian wars and the Ukrainian wars, targeting is all being carried out thanks to space being utilized. So space becomes a key factor for us in times to come, like for any other country. And Chinese, as you rightly pointed out, have also been exceedingly working. They have a very large number of satellites. They launched nearly the maximum satellites in the world here, and they have plenty of spy satellites. Having said that, we are also mindful of the fact and that we have been working extensively over the course of last 4 or 5 years to understand that there is a realm of space warfare that we need to address. It can be by denial of communication to us by jamming electronic warfare, or it could be denial of GPS to us or the navigation systems to us, or for that matter, satellite, and which we ourselves use for ISR work. Chinese have, as you mentioned, ASAT weapons. They also have micro mini satellites floating around in the sky, which can liven up at one time and come and destroy your own satellite. So there are multiple ways where space is being addressed here. These are issues of intensive debate and discussion and work in India as to how we should create the resilience to accept the space as a realm of warfare in that manner. We have also tried out an ASAT weapon, as you're probably aware. We have also worked into the realms of electronic warfare and other realms, which I don't think is relevant out here. But we are mindful of the fact that space is a dimension of warfare, which a domain of warfare, which is absolutely essential for us. as without that, the functioning of the forces comes to a limp.
So coming to a different domain, in cyber domain, there were some allegations that in a electric grid shut down in Mumbai region, China has something to do. Uh, are we seeing nascent cyber threats emanating from China to India's infrastructure, especially using cyber sabotage?
So, Dr. Adityanjee, this is a realm of warfare which is most important because it reflects on space, it reflects on electronic warfare. Cyber actually amalgamates everything, nearly everything, including targeting, including sensors, including. So, cyber becomes a realm. Now, in the gray zone, as you referred to it, there have been plenty of information of Chinese or for their proxies, Pakistanis attempting to undermine Indian capabilities. Like you mentioned about the Bombay outage, which happened on the load dispatch centers, which New York Times carried an article. It is thanks to the Chinese. There have been a damage to a plant last year in Leh. There have been attacks on All Indian Institute of Medical Sciences. There have been also disinformation in a big way. Cyber is a big way in disinformation. They said one of these TikTok apps called Hello actually bought 10,000 odd advertisements in 2019 before the elections to affect the minds of people using cyber realm. So cyber is all important, and there has been functionaries of the government who have said that last year we had 40,000 cyber attacks in India alone, and these were emanating from our adversaries. So this is an important issue. Also, that our larger equipment and routers and computers and low dispatch equipment were purchased off the shelf, maybe belonging to Chinese. So there's a feel that there could be some Trojans or malware which could be affected. So having accepted that there is a major threat, we have moved into a very large way to address these issues here. And the armed forces itself established a cyber command or a cyber department to offset this. And similarly, the government of India has taken up strong steps against to combat cyber warfare, in defensive and offensive. I am not very sure which is the level that we have reached, but I think our focus is right to protect the country against the cyber threat, which is absolutely looming and very, very important against India.
Coming to a different area, China has historically paid lip service to its no first use nuclear doctrine. However, over the years, China has gradually revised and watered down its new NFU doctrine. And in recent weeks, certain entities in China had issued an overt threat to Japan about nuclear annihilation of Japan. Should India revise her own NFU doctrine looking at Chinese postures? And any paper agreement they sign is like a toilet paper. It's not worth the value.
That's
Should
a
India revise the
that,
NFU doctrine?
so that's a very touchy issue. And Dr. Adityanjee, in India, as many people who debate NFU speak in different languages altogether. So you have jitna muh utni baat. Everybody has a different opinion altogether. Now, I have my opinions, and my opinions may be my own personal opinions, that they are not reflective on anybody else. BJP's manifesto in 2014 stated that there should be a revision of the NFU. Since the time the nuclear doctrine came up 2003, many aspects of the nuclear doctrine have been debated extensively in India and outside, including NFU. There are many other issues which have been debated, massive retaliation, etc., which have come up into this fore. Subsequently, the Defense Minister of India in 2016 stated that the NFU has outlived its utility, or some words to that effect, and we should revise it. In 2019, again in August, the Defense Minister of India stated that the NFU must be revised, reconsidered. I am of the same opinion. I'm saying, and I see the writings of one seasoned NSA who's written a book which said that NFU is not cast in stone, or it is not that there are no caveats to it. My personal opinion, and I'm stating it as my personal opinion, I think we need to reconsider the nuclear doctrine that India brought out in the entire gamut of affairs in that time, 2013, the draft doctrine, and revise it with the realities of 2023. Because what came out in 2003 was just after 4 to 5 years after the blasts had taken place, and it was evolving. But now, 20 years later, it has evolved. In that evolution process, I personally feel that either we should lay down clear caveats to where NFU will not be applied. We can say we have NFU, but we have caveats 1, 2, 3, 4, in which case we will deem it that NFU is not relevant, or do away with NFU altogether. Because we have two adversaries, both are colluding with each other, both support each other. Pakistan gets tremendous amount of support from the Chinese. And I understand when people say that the nuclear weapons are only for political use and not for military use. But one of our adversaries, Pakistan, keeps talking of nuclear weapons as conventional use weapons. General Kidwai recently mentioned that they can use the nuclear weapons from 0 kilometers. Means at 0 kilometers is there right at the beginning. With all these changes which have been stated about, I think we need to reconsider and re-examine the nuclear doctrine and the NFU poster that India has got.
So, General Sharma, China has been in adverse possession of Indian territories both in eastern as well as in western sectors since 1950s. The time to strike an adversary is when the adversary is at its weakest point. Since 1949 onwards, when CCP occupied China mainland and took over the governance of that country, in your perception, when was the best moment for India to recapture its lost territories? Or we never got to that point?
Against Pakistan, I will say 1948, we could have pushed it further. It's my again my personal opinion. We could have gone to Skardu. We were close by, and I think we needed to move ahead. We could have gone across to Muzaffarabad. We had gone 100 kilometers from Srinagar, reached Udi, and there was nothing left for us to stopping us to have gone through to Muzaffarabad and also towards Nikyal, totally Nikyal. So I mean, 48 was a time we could have done many things. Against the Chinese, things are a little different. In 50s, there was this cartographic issues on the G219 highway being built, and our own maps being in the way the maps worked in 1954, and then the discussion that took place in the war before the war came up to 62. We had done patrolling, I think, in the areas of 50s. The Chinese were not defending it at that time, and we could have done much and gone and occupied, or done some work in 50s to take on excitation at that juncture. It was possible, and we could have done it. After the war, and the post 62 war, then the whole conceptology changed, where the threat pattern means there were forces deployed on both sides of the border, and forces having reached, and subsequently by 70s, when things came to light, the Chinese were making gradual infrastructure which came on, and as time passes, infrastructure kept increasing, the force levels increasing, it becomes increasingly difficult now to do so. Subsequently, in last 30-40 years, would be a full-fledged war which have to be fought to occupy these areas, especially in eastern Ladakh. The Chinese are occupying. Not that cannot be done, but warfare is not territory alone. To take on an adversary, you have to fight on multiple fronts, and you have to find the adversary's weak points, actually his heels. where it hurts. We don't have to fight the adversary's strength. Adversary wants us to fight to his strength. We want the adversary to fight on our strengths. So we have to find which are the tukti rag, which is what pains the adversary. That's where to address it and achieve your strategic advantages that you wish to do so. So to answer you, we'll have to do a plan it in an absolutely different manner in whenever the next hostilities takes place.
I mean, looking back, it's an armchair exercise. You said we could have done in 50s, we could have done during the time of Cultural Revolution. But there was one moment when China was in total disarray. And I'll remind you, that was June 4th, 1989. June 4th, 1989 was when Tiananmen Square demonstrations were taking place. Chinese army was killing its own citizens. We lost the opportunity. Could a similar incident happen in future? I mean, all said and done, our territories has been adversely occupied. And at some point in time, we'll have to use force to take it back.
So this is the realms of imagination as we are reaching. What if happened in Tiananmen Square time? Tiananmen Square, then later on there was Falun Gong also, and so many events have happened in life which we have followed through. In times of Jiang Zemin, there was Falun Gong, as you are well aware, and there have been troubles in Xinjiang in between, and Hu Juntao's times, etc. So there are many events that happen into lives. Tiananmen Square is one major event that stands out like that. But would you say that the military on the Chinese side was not prepared for this eventuality? Now the kind of infrastructure Chinese have developed by aircrafts, by airports, by the blast pens that they have made, the heliports, the cantonments, the quantum of force brought into this area. Actually, we can't rewind into history, and that history is the historians actually enjoy the art of reading the past tense and coming on to present. But we can't go back to past tense and say what could have been done here. We have to think about the next. And next is that there is substantial Chinese presence here and Chinese infrastructure development, which are followed by us, including bridges across the Pegongso Lake and the G695, which is being built in the proximity as a lateral all along the borders from Shaidullah to Arunachal Pradesh. It's a massive road being built, so opposite Arunachal Pradesh. So the fact of the matter is that there is a changed environment on the borders. Now we have to think how we will prosecute the next war if it happens. War is not inevitable, and nobody wants a war. Chinese are the last people to say, come to fight a war. No, they would think to achieve their ends in a better manner. But suffice it to say, we'll have to contemplate as to what and where we can take advantage where it is possible to be done.
So again, war is not the desired means of achieving one's national security objectives. Having said that, planning for war is very important.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
in case of a future India-China war, uh, leave aside the government and leave aside the official, establishment, defense establishment. As a thinker, as a researcher, as a PhD in defense studies, what legitimate targets India should zero on in China in case of a future India-China war?
I think you'll permit me to take a step back on this one and leave it. I might blurt out something which I need not blurt out. So these I
Okay,
mentioned as it.
I will not ask you to say. I will give you the targets. Will Coco Island communication listening post and a naval base that is coming, would that be a legitimate target to strike?
Look, if there is hostilities on and hostilities means a war is broken up and declared, well, then anything can be a legitimate target, and we would certainly take on legitimate targets on which there is a presence across there, and there is no hindrances then to do so. But
Hambantota Port, which is now
again,
Chinese territory for 99 years, would that be a legitimate target?
so that's a these are difficult questions to be done. These are, Chinese have got 100 ports all over the world in 64 countries. They actually own ports all over. They're making in Tanzania and Mozambique and Djibouti and even Oman, for that matter, or two in Bangladesh. And all these ports, they may be utilized in some manner. I think this is into realms of kind of rhetoric that we need not trespass it at this time. The forces who work on this end to say how the port will be utilized at the time of war, or how an island like Coco, as you mentioned, will be utilized, and whether that will be a legitimate and important target to be addressed. I think the forces will plan to do so in that manner.
Let me continue to be a little bit more provocative. Would Korakoram Highway be a legitimate target for India in case of a future India-China war, were it to ever happen?
So infrastructure is a target always. Infrastructure, and I'm not saying Karakoram Highway or the Kunjre Pass or whatever, is a legitimate. It would be a legitimate target anytime when there is a declaration of war, because when we create a battle space, and we create a battle space that is bounded or enclosed or stopped in that manner so that there is no ingress or ingress taking place, well, anything that is of infrastructure which will allow us to do create of that creation of that battle space, well, we would target it. And I think any one of these targets that you mentioned would be as part of the battle space, which will be utilized for us in preparing ourselves for hostilities that take place.
Okay. Uh, Again, the next question is a little bit provocative, and you may, take the attitude that you would not like to comment, but nevertheless, I will still ask the question. After the recent Galwan conflict, we have not received, return to the status quo ante. You know, the two armed forces are still, eyeball to eyeball. Why did India return the advantageous positions in Kailash mountain range without having a comprehensive agreement? Are we fools to trust Chinese that they will reciprocate? I mean, we gave up the advantage, the only advantage we had.
Firstly, Dr. Adityanjee, we have the capacity to obtain advantage like the advantage of Kailash range in many other places at moment's notice. So we should not write off the prowess of the Indian Armed Forces to do a Kailash range or any one such task all across the border when we wish to do so. And we have the capacities and force levels and plans and thinking process to do so. So then that's a part of the story. Second is that consequent to what happened in 2020 in Galwan clash, which is item which happened in that whole timing, there are those buffers created. So there is a denial of patrolling to the Chinese and the denial of patrolling to us, to where we used to patrol and where Chinese used to patrol. So the without referral to territorial integrity, and without referral to what is truly ours and what we need to dominate and patrol, there have been buffers created as manner. There have been some areas. See, firstly, the area of Kailash range, the forces were arrayed opposite each other at face to face. It was just too close, and there could have been instances where it was leading off to a war. The tanks were arrayed with a short distance between themselves, and so were the troops. Second is the issue is that there is a Pegongso Lake where the Chinese had intruded up to Finger 4 and established a proper camp there, including prefab huts and including jetties and all that. The kind of infrastructure they had brought into in Pegongso Finger 4 and 5 actually gave an impression that they were here for a long haul. They were not wanting to move away from this one. On the in between, in the Kailash range itself, there were some places which Chinese were occupied, which we are not fully occupied by us. The Pegongso having come to Finger 4, was actually willy-nilly denying the entire lake to us in some manner. So the threat being posed of an imminent hostilities, and believe me, which we have followed through subsequently, we had come as close to war as possible consequent to that time. That after 29th and 30th of August, when Kailash Range operation happened, by 10th of September, the foreign minister and the foreign minister of China, Wang Yi, had met in Moscow and signed an agreement saying that we should preclude war. And they said a 5-point agreement saying that, okay, we have come so close to war in Kailash Range that we need to take a step backward. I think that was a largely important decision taken to take a step back so that Kailash Range is neither occupied by the Chinese nor by us. It's our territory. We deem it as our territory. We fought the war in 62 there, Kailash Range. Many of us have gone there and visited those areas. So without leaving Kailash Range, and we have been able to withdraw back from that area. We patrol it. We dominate it even now in many manners of speaking. But yes, we had dogs. I think the wisdom was to deny an opportunity of escalation, and the event was becoming too escalatory in nature. That's what we deem it, and that's what we analyze subsequently as events has happened.
China's rapid expansion of plan is accompanied by increase in number of China's aircraft carrier formations, which now stands at 3. We have 2, uh, you know, should we continue to focus on increasing our naval strength and develop indeed a deep blue water navy with more emphasis on aircraft carrier formations?
So interesting question, and again, as many opinions and as many people as there would be. First answer to your question is yes. We must develop a navy which is substantially larger. We have 50, 60 ships in the making of various sizes and various types, but we need to work hard. We need to get SSNs. We need to get SSNs because that's the game changer in navy today. The submarines, the nuclear submarines. There is where we have a little need to work harder on SSNs. That's one issue. And SSN versus a nuclear aircraft carrier, I think to me it is no brainer. To me, it is that you require many more SSNs. It will make tremendous amount of difference to the potential of a navy to have an SSN, because an aircraft carrier is not one ship. You require a flotilla. It requires a whole gamut of ships along with it. So it's not just one aircraft carrier. Now we need to, aircraft carrier is also an expensive hobby. Chinese may have 6 in times to come. But the fact is that do we require a third carrier? Yes, we require a third aircraft carrier. Certainly we require it. Can we afford a third aircraft carrier? That's a difficult question. Can we afford a third aircraft carrier vis-a-vis having another 20 more frigates and destroyers, or having another 6 more SSNs? Well, that's what Navy has to examine in that manner, which is more important. It has to be weighted in that manner. How it's all a question of how we are going to prosecute next wars, how the adversary is going to prosecute the next war, how we are going to prosecute the next war, and how can we deem advantage. If aircraft carrier is absolutely essential, and we can, because we also have uh, a little hold back on the total finances available to the armed forces, and we have to weigh out which compensates for what, which is more advantageous for us to do so. There is no comparison to having hard power. Absolutely essential to have hard power with the adversaries that we have. But aircraft carrier, well, it has to be discussed in the realms of overall war potential of the Navy by 2035 and later on 2050. Maybe by 2050 we certainly require. The problem is to get an aircraft carrier going, the lead time required is 15 to 20 years. So you have to think in that manner that today that you require an aircraft carrier in 20 years, and whether we should have how many SSNs in addition to having an aircraft carrier?
Now, coming back to your paper, you did mention that China's official defense budget is around 300 billion, but unofficial estimates are $700 billion. Around 2004, 2005, there was some sort of parity between Indian defense budget and Chinese defense budget. Indian defense budget would be around $30 billion and Chinese would be 42 or 43. And every year that asymmetry kept on increasing. Uh, in terms of proportion or percentage of our GDP, should we set a benchmark, from future planning perspective, that certain proportion or certain percentage of our GDP should be earmarked for our defense budget, rather than outlining in absolute terms?
So let me answer it differently, Dr. Adityanjee. The point is that there are superpowers with 750 to $800 billion defense budget who lost all wars that they have fought in the course of last 40, 50 years, be it Vietnam or be it Afghanistan, or for that matter, Russia having lost in Afghanistan, or a stalemate in the Korean War, or Chinese having had a tough time in Vietnam. It's because they were asymmetrically weaker adversaries that they had. Superpowers having weaker adversaries, even in Iraq for that matter. And weaker adversaries have been able to show the stronger adversary what it means to fight in a manner. It's not the defense budget alone, it's the manner of war fighting. It's how you plan to approach your task, to, which doesn't imply that you require the kind of sophistication. Taliban didn't have the kind of sophistication that the United States had in Afghanistan, but Taliban was able to succeed in that manner. The asymmetry has to be taken advantage of and fought asymmetrically. Asymmetric force level and asymmetric type of warfare, two different things. And we need to plan this way. Now, coming to the basic question is, first we have to conceptualize, and we have hopefully done so, as to how to fight an asymmetrically large adversary which has taken steps across, major leaps across technologically, how to fight it. Now, to fight that adversary, what best is required to combat it? Where can we take advantage, and we will make that we can gain that strategic advantage, which can be done so. So to gain the strategic advantage, it is the method of war fighting, not as much as wherewithal. Wherewithal matters. To answer you about the defense budget, yes, but we are a developing nation. We are also hard power, I repeat, is most essential to provide the soft power strengths to function across. Even diplomacy rests on the strength of the hard power, which is economics and military. Without a strong economy and without strong military, even diplomacy doesn't move forward. Question is, it is the question of socio-economic development of our country, the bread and butter debate, which goes on and on. I personally feel that we need to enhance the defense budget, but we also need to rethink as to how we will be able to utilize the defense budget in a manner that we are able to combat a asymmetrically large and technologically stronger enemy in a manner that we are able to proceed to achieve the war aims that are laid down to us by our politicians. So the fact of the matter is that there has to be strength into thinking processes, the cognitive processes, before we come down to which is the exact budget required. We today may be running at 1.5 or 1.6% of GDP, including the pensions. Maybe it is 2.05 or 2.10. I would say that it is still substantial in the country. It comes to 12-13% of our total expenditure that we do in the country. As the total earnings, 12-13% of expenditures. But it needs to be thought in a manner of prosecuting war first and achieving our aims and success, then converting into capabilities to do that task, And in those capabilities come down to individual forces, which may say, like you say, a second aircraft carrier or another squadron of Rafale jets, or some offensive operations, or some offensive cyber, or some satellite. So that all combined together becomes what should be a defense budget.
Thank you, General Rakesh Sharma.
Thank
It
you.
was a pleasure talking to you about on these contentious issues.
Thank
But
you.
as you said, a wise nation plans for the future. And the future is not tomorrow. Future is not day after, future is forever. So we need to start long-term planning with a long-term perspective rather than 2025 or 2030. We should be planning for 2050 and 100 kind of thing. That is something lacking in our strategic establishment, that we have never indulged in long-term planning, and time has come for us to do so. So on that note of mutual agreement, we shall end
Thank you.
this conversation. It's been a pleasure. We hope that you will continue to come on our platform
Thank you, Dr. Thank you for inviting me.
on this particular feature, but there are other features like distinguished lectures, roundtable discussions. But thank you very much indeed for
Thank you, sir.
enlightening us today.
Thank you, sir. I'm honored, sir. Bye-bye.
Thank you.